WTA officially shuts down after 32 tennis players are arrested in a massive gambling scandal. No one believed it could happen, not to the sport built on grace, discipline, and legacy. But behind every perfect serve and winning smile, a storm was brewing. What started as a few suspicious bets turned into the biggest betrayal in tennis history. Millions watched as their heroes fell, one name after another, exposed to the world. Coaches vanished, sponsors fled, and silence spread across locker rooms like a virus. In a matter of days, decades of reputation collapsed into dust. This wasn't just the end of a season, it was the death of women's tennis itself. The Women's Tennis Association, once the heartbeat of global women's tennis, stood as a symbol of grace, talent, and fierce competition. Every serve, every rally, every victory carried the weight of history. The courts glimmered under bright lights, filled with roaring crowds and flashing cameras. For decades, the WTA had built an empire of trust and inspiration. From Serena Williams' reign to the rise of fearless new stars, the sport had never looked stronger. Sponsors poured in millions, fans followed every match religiously, and young girls across the world dreamed of lifting that shining trophy one day. But behind the polished surface, something darker was taking shape. In the middle of the 2025 season, betting analysts began noticing strange patterns, matches where underdogs suddenly triumphed after bizarre unforced errors, or medical timeouts that seemed suspiciously timed. Lower-tier tournaments, often ignored by the media, were showing wild betting spikes minutes before play even began. At first, it was dismissed as coincidence. After all, tennis has always been unpredictable. But soon, the data became undeniable. Out of 50 analyzed matches, nearly 20 showed irregular wagering activity linked to the same group of accounts. Sports integrity watchdogs quietly alerted the WTA, warning that something bigger might be happening. Yet inside the organization there was hesitation, fear that going public could damage their spotless image. Then came the whispers. A mid-ranked player suddenly withdrew from a match claiming personal reasons. Another retired in the middle of the second set, despite no visible injury. Some players started avoiding press conferences, while others seemed unusually quiet online. Insiders spoke of locker room arguments, secret late-night phone calls, and agents who appeared nervous during tournaments. One anonymous source claimed, "It's not just players, it's a system. Coaches, agents, even insiders are taking cuts. Everyone knows something, but no one talks." By summer, journalists began digging deeper. Leaked documents from an online betting firm revealed unusual patterns connected to several WTA matches. When a reporter confronted one of the accused players, she broke down in tears and refused to comment. That clip went viral overnight, and for the first time, fans began to question whether their beloved sport was still pure. Inside WTA headquarters, panic quietly spread. Executives held emergency meetings, lawyers drafted statements, and communications teams prepared responses in case the story went public. Yet, despite the mounting tension, the association chose silence. They believed they could contain it. They were wrong. What began as a few suspicious matches would soon become the largest scandal in tennis history, one that would shake the WTA to its core and rewrite the legacy of women's tennis forever. The fall had already begun, and no one even knew it. The first domino fell quietly, but its sound echoed across the world of tennis. After weeks of speculation, an internal investigation confirmed that at least 5 players were directly linked to suspicious betting activity. The WTA tried to keep the findings private, labeling them as ongoing disciplinary reviews. But secrets don't stay buried for long, not in the digital age. Within days, the story exploded across social media. 32 players under investigation for match fixing. At first, fans refused to believe it. The sport that had built its image on integrity and hard work was suddenly under fire. But as names began to leak, denial turned into disbelief, and disbelief turned into rage. Online forums were flooded with screenshots of betting patterns, blurred financial statements, and snippets of private messages. Hashtags like WTA fixing scandal and tennis betrayal trended for days. Fans demanded answers. Sponsors froze their contracts. Tournament organizers canceled press conferences. The tension was unbearable. Players who had nothing to do with the scandal now faced harsh stares from fans and the media. Every double fault, every misstep, every unusual timeout was viewed with suspicion. Even legends of the sport began speaking out. One retired champion wrote on X, formerly Twitter, "If this is true, then we've all been playing a lie. Every trophy, every match, what does it even mean now?" Within 2 weeks, the count of suspended players jumped from 5 to 12. Then 16, then 32. The dominoes were falling faster than anyone could stop them. A leaked audio recording hit the internet. Players' voices, unmistakable, discussing betting odds during a late-night conversation. The recording was raw, chilling, and undeniable. One voice could be heard saying, "If we both drop the second set, they double the payout." Another responded, "Keep it quiet. They'll never find out." Those 6 words, "They'll never find out," became the headline of every major sports outlet on Earth. The public's reaction was ferocious. Crowds at tournaments began chanting "cheaters" during matches. A few players broke down on court, others refused to speak to the press. The atmosphere was toxic. The trust between athletes and fans shattered beyond repair. The WTA, now under immense pressure, announced an emergency ethics hearing. But by then it was too late. Major sponsors, Nike, Rolex, and Emirates, issued temporary suspensions of their endorsements. Television networks began questioning whether they should continue broadcasting tournaments. And in the background, a storm was brewing even bigger than anyone could imagine. Governments had started watching. Law enforcement agencies from 5 countries, including the US, France, and Spain, confirmed they were collaborating with Interpol to track the financial web behind the scandal. The dominoes were no longer just players. They were managers, coaches, data analysts, even insiders within the organization. Each revelation destroyed another piece of the sport's foundation. It was no longer just about tennis. It was about betrayal, at every level. For decades, the WTA had prided itself on being a symbol of women's empowerment. Now that symbol stood tarnished, cracked, and trembling under the weight of corruption. Fans who once cried tears of joy at championship points now cried tears of disbelief. The cheers were gone, the applause replaced by silence. What had begun as a few suspicious matches had turned into a full-blown implosion. And as the world watched the WTA burn, one question echoed louder than any other. If the game itself can't be trusted, what's left to believe in? The scandal that had started as whispers in locker rooms had now become a full-blown global catastrophe. By early March, international headlines screamed the same story in every language. WTA gambling network exposed, arrests made in 5 countries. Interpol agents, working alongside national police forces, carried out simultaneous raids across Europe, Asia, and North America. Laptop screens lit up in dark hotel rooms as handcuffed players were escorted through airport corridors. Coaches were detained, agents disappeared, and entire training academies were shut down overnight. The footage was surreal. World-class athletes, once adored by millions, now standing behind courtroom glass walls. The disbelief was unbearable. Some cried, others refused to speak. One top player, known for her fierce determination, was seen trembling as reporters shouted her name outside a courthouse in Madrid. The global tennis community had never seen anything like it. The International Tennis Integrity Agency confirmed that this was the largest match-fixing investigation in the history of the sport, and at its center, the Women's Tennis Association itself. Sponsors who had invested billions began pulling out one by one. Stadiums stood empty. Broadcasters cut live coverage mid-tournament. The ripple effect hit every corner of the game. Tennis academies shut down, prize money froze, and ranking points were suspended indefinitely. Inside WTA headquarters in St. Petersburg, Florida, chaos reigned. Executives were seen entering closed-door meetings that lasted for hours. Internal emails leaked to the press showed desperate discussions: how to pay employees, how to protect the brand, how to survive. But survival was no longer an option. The public had lost faith. Fans protested outside major venues, holding signs reading "You sold our game" and "Justice for clean players." Former champions appeared on talk shows, their voices trembling with anger and disappointment. One said, "We built this sport with our sweat and sacrifice, and now it's been destroyed by greed." Social media was relentless. Players' homes were vandalized, their social accounts flooded with hate. Some received threats. Others vanished from public view entirely. The pressure was crushing, not just on those accused, but on everyone associated with the WTA. And then came the government intervention. The U.S. Department of Justice announced a joint operation with European authorities. They traced millions of dollars flowing through offshore accounts linked to betting rings in Cyprus, Singapore, and the UAE. It was no longer just a sports issue. It was organized crime. For the WTA, this was the breaking point. The organization was drowning, financially, legally, and morally. Staff began resigning. PR directors quit overnight. The board's credibility collapsed. One insider leaked that the association had less than 6 weeks of operational funds left. Meanwhile, the players who weren't accused, the innocent ones, suffered too. Their matches were canceled, their sponsorships gone, their dreams frozen in limbo. The same fans who once cheered their names now viewed them with suspicion. Every corner of women's tennis was infected by the scandal's shadow. And then, in a chilling twist, an anonymous email surfaced, sent to major media outlets. It contained hundreds of internal WTA documents, conversations, warnings, and ignored alerts, proving that some high-ranking officials had known about the betting irregularities months before the news broke. The betrayal was complete. The game wasn't destroyed by outsiders. It had rotted from within. As Interpol expanded its investigation and the media descended like vultures, one question began circling among insiders and fans alike. Would the WTA even survive the week? The countdown to the collapse had begun. The day began like any other, but by sunset, women's tennis would never be the same again. Outside the WTA headquarters in Florida, hundreds of reporters stood waiting, cameras flashing, microphones raised, the air thick with tension. Inside, the final emergency board meeting was underway. Hours of debate, legal consultations, and desperate phone calls had led to one inevitable conclusion: the Women's Tennis Association could no longer stand. At precisely 4:17 p.m., WTA President Eleanor Myers stepped up to the podium. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. Behind her, the organization's logo, once a symbol of strength and pride, flickered on a large digital screen. Cameras zoomed in. The world held its breath. She began softly, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "It is with deep sadness that I announce the suspension of all WTA operations." Effective immediately, the words fell like thunder. For a moment, there was silence, then chaos. Reporters shouted questions, flashes erupted, and social media erupted into a frenzy. WTA officially shut down. The headline was everywhere within minutes. Inside the building, staff members wept. Some clutched files, others stared blankly at computer screens that would soon go dark. Players around the world, from Tokyo to Paris, received the same notification on their phones. All tournaments canceled. WTA ceases activity until further notice. Tears flooded locker rooms. Rackets were packed away. Careers, dreams, and decades of legacy, all gone in a single statement. Television channels began replaying the president's speech on loop. Fans couldn't believe what they were seeing. A sport that had survived wars, pandemics, and generational changes had fallen to corruption, to its own wounds. In London, a commentator broke down live on air. "We covered this sport for 30 years. We saw champions rise and fall, but this is a funeral." The shutdown triggered an avalanche. Sponsorship contracts were terminated, ongoing tournaments dissolved, and hundreds of employees lost their jobs overnight. The global tennis economy, worth billions, crumbled in real time. Even the ITF and ATP issued emergency statements expressing deep concern for the state of the sport. But the public's reaction was divided. Some fans expressed heartbreak, others demanded accountability. Protesters gathered outside stadiums chanting, "Bring back clean tennis," while angry bettors demanded refunds for canceled events. The trust between fans and the game had vanished completely. As the sun set that evening, news drones hovered over the empty WTA offices. The once bustling parking lot was silent. The logo on the front gate was dimmed, a haunting image that circulated across every network, captioned simply, "The End of an Era." Meanwhile, in private chat rooms, journalists and insiders speculated about the future. Could an independent women's league rise from the ashes? Would the players form a new union? Or was this truly the end of women's professional tennis as the world knew it? One unnamed insider whispered to a reporter, "We knew this day was coming." The system was bleeding from inside. Today, it finally collapsed. And so, after more than 50 years of history, from Billie Jean King's revolution to the modern-day stars, the WTA was gone. No farewell ceremony. No final match. Just an abrupt silence that echoed across empty courts. For fans, it felt like a heartbreak. For players, it felt like betrayal. And for the sport itself, it felt like a warning that even the strongest empires can fall, not because of their enemies, but because of their own greed. That night, tennis wasn't just suspended, it was mourned. The stadium lights dimmed, the banners came down, and the whispers began to fade into history. The WTA was no more, and women's tennis had lost its heartbeat. Months had passed since the collapse, yet the echo of the WTA's downfall still haunted the world of tennis. Empty courts stood like ghost towns, cracked, silent, and forgotten. The stadiums that once roared with applause now echoed with the faint hum of wind brushing against torn banners. The name WTA had become taboo, a reminder of betrayal, greed, and a legacy destroyed by its own hands. But time has a strange way of exposing truth. As investigations continued, documentaries began to surface, revealing hidden details that painted an even darker picture. Secret meetings, ignored whistleblower reports, and powerful executives who had turned a blind eye for years. Every new revelation deepened the wound. Former players, now retired or exiled from the sport, finally began to speak. One of them, her voice trembling, confessed during an interview, "We were told to stay quiet. They said it was just rumors. But we all knew something was wrong." Another, once ranked in the world's top 10, broke down in tears on live television. "Tennis was my life. And they used it. They used us for money, for power, for everything but love for the game." Fans who had once idolized these athletes found themselves torn between anger and compassion. Some refused to forgive, saying that betrayal this deep could never be erased. Others believed redemption was still possible, that the players were victims of a corrupted system. Meanwhile, rumors swirled about a possible rebirth. Whispers of a new, independent league, built not by corporations, but by former players determined to reclaim the sport's soul. A league without politics, without greed, one that would rise from the ashes of the WTA. But skeptics doubted whether trust could ever be rebuilt. Sponsors, too, were hesitant. Who would invest, one executive asked, in a sport that couldn't protect itself from its own players? Yet amidst the doubt, there were signs of hope. Young athletes, teenagers who had grown up watching the scandal unfold, began training harder than ever, vowing to bring integrity back to the court. To them, the WTA wasn't the end. It was a warning. Tennis journalists started calling this new era the Reconstruction. An age where every serve, every rally, and every handshake would be watched, not with blind admiration, but with a demand for honesty. The game, scarred and shaken, would have to earn its respect all over again. But for many, the pain remained. The fans still remembered the headlines, the arrests, the tears of fallen champions. They remembered the silence of those who could have spoken sooner and didn't. In the final episode of a global documentary about the scandal, a narrator's words summed up the tragedy perfectly. It wasn't the defeat on the court that destroyed tennis. It was the defeat of conscience. As the screen faded to black, a haunting question lingered, one that no one could yet answer. Was this the rebirth of women's tennis? Or the end of its innocence forever? And with that, the credits rolled. A quiet requiem for an empire that once ruled the world. And then lost everything. If this story shook you, remember, every sport survives only as long as truth stands behind it. Subscribe to stay part of this journey as we uncover how tennis, and those who still believe in it, fight to rise again.